All right, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. So hopefully you're here for the API troubleshooting session for PureCloud. If not, stay put, you're going to have a good time anyway. So my name is Tim Smith. I'm a senior developer evangelist at PureCloud. I maintain the Developer Center and Developer Forum. So if any of you guys have been out on the forum asking questions, there's a good chance you've seen me around answering them. If you have any questions during the session, just raise your hand. We'll address them as we can throughout the session. So don't feel that you need to hold them until the end, but we will use whatever time we have left for Q&A at the end. So first off, and this is super awkward timing since the bathrooms are out, but make sure that you hydrate because it's super dry out here, and if you don't drink enough water, you will get altitude sickness. So drink that water. All right, so the agenda for today, we start off, what's an error? We're going to talk about that. What does an unsuccessful response look like? Talk about some response status codes, go over some documentation and some tools, and then look at some common problems that you may run into and how you can fix those. And then how you can get help if you have questions after the next 59 minutes. All right, so first of all, what is an error? Whenever you make an API request and you get back anything that's not a 200-level response code, you've got yourself an error. Most of the time it'll follow a format similar to this response body here, which will give you some basic information about the error. It'll tell you the status code, which is also just generally available in whatever library you're using for the HTTP status code. The code part of this is just a string that tells you that, hey, this is a known error in PureCloud, that we detected some sort of condition, and so we are giving you a specific string. Those strings are documented on the APIs in the response documentation, so you can know what to expect for each API. It'll have a message that generally explains what's kind of wrong with your API request. In this example here, it's telling you that you are missing the field content type. So you made a bad request because you left out that field. Sometimes there is a message with params, and then params if you want to display that to a user or put it nicely in your logs or localize it or anything. So sometimes that's there, sometimes it's not. It depends on the API. The context ID comes back with it. That's useful for troubleshooting if you're working with anybody from Genesis, and we'll talk about that more later. And depending on the specific error and API you're calling, there may be additional details and error messages passed with that response. So, HTTP response status codes. How many can't talk today. How many people know all of them off the top of your heads? Come on, this is a developer convention. You're supposed to know that stuff. No, the best way to find out, Google that title, HTTP response status codes, and you can find a nice web page that has them listed out, so you can get a good idea of what all those are. Some of the most common ones, 200-level responses, anything from 200 to 299, those are successful responses. That means that everything probably went okay. Your request was accepted and it was processed probably, or is processing, but the request you made was just fine. If you get a 300-level response, there's a couple different ones there. That's not very common, but particularly if you are getting a download URL, it may actually return a 300-level response to redirect you to the actual file instead of just giving you the URL. But that's fairly rare in the API. 400-level errors, the rarity of those is entirely dependent on you. Those are client errors. So basically a 400 level says, hey, you've done something wrong. Which one it is dependent on what you did wrong. So a 400 that's kind of the catch-all. That means there was just something wrong with your request. If you sent malformed JSON, that would cause that 400 because the server can't parse it. So if it's just wrong in some general way, you'll get that 400. Some of the more specific ones, if you forgot to add authorization to your request, you're going to need that 401, or you're going to get that 401 response code. So that tells you that you just missed something in your code and you forgot to set the authorization header. If you get a 403, though, that means you did set the authorization header, but it wasn't valid in some way. Either the token was expired, or you're lacking permissions, or something else, you were prevented from accessing that API. And generally the body will give you more specifics on that, like what permission you need, or why you were rejected. 404, probably have a typo somewhere, because you requested an API path that just simply doesn't exist. So go back, check the docs, check your IDs if you're sending anything in a path, and make sure that you got all that right. 418 is I'm a teapot. You get that back when you're making requests to a coffee machine and asking for coffee, and it's, it's a teapot, not a coffee machine. You think I'm joking, go look it up. 418 is a real response code, because people who write this stuff they like to have a whole lot of fun, so, they put a fun one in there. We don't actually send that one, though, because we are neither teapots nor coffee makers. 429. So if you're just going ham on the API and sending a whole bunch of requests, at some point you're going to get rate limited. Generally the rate limiter is about 300 requests per minute, but we don't publish the exact rate limiters because they do change based on platform health and status, and there's multiple conditions that will cause you to get rate limited. But if you get a 429, definitely have your app slow down. There was a retry after header, and this is documented on a page called Rate Limiting on the Developer Center. You can use your retry after header to tell your app how long it needs to wait before making more requests. And finally, the 500 level errors. That means, well, we didn't do anything wrong because we're perfect, but maybe the server had a problem or something. 500 just means something bad happened. We generally don't tell you what. We'll have stuff in our logs, so more when we talk about the context or correlation IDs. That'll be particularly useful when looking at 500 level errors, because that will pinpoint in our logs what went wrong. But 500 is just kind of the general catch-all, something in the server blew up. Kind of like the 400 level, it's just the general error. 503, service unavailable. You may see that one from time to time. So PureCloud, as hopefully you know, is a cloud solution and is scalable. So whenever we scale up, because we're getting more load, occasionally, one out of thousands of requests as we scale up may hit that service right as it's coming up, and you'll get a 503 because it's not quite ready to process the request. It's not very common that happens, but it does happen. If you get a 503, generally you can retry the request. 500 level errors are not, they're not defined as retriable. But in a PureCloud environment, a 503, if you wait a second or two and retry, it should be fine.
So key there would be, though, you might want to cover the wait before you retry, or else you're just exacerbating the
Yes.
issue.
Yeah, if you are going to, so there are conditions where we will include the retry after header on 500 level responses. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It depends on the condition that caused it. If the retry after header is there, please respect that and wait however long it says to retry that request. If it's not there, wait a couple seconds and retry once or maybe twice, and then at that point, if it's still failing, let it go. There's some sort of issue. So then your application should respond in kind with displaying an error message or whatever you need to do when there's an API error. All right, so API documentation. How many of you have been to developer.mypurecloud.com? Show of hands. All right, most of you have at least seen it. So developer.mypurecloud.com would actually be a really great thing to put on this slide. I don't know who wrote this thing, man. But, so let's jump out of the presentation real quick, show you the site. So developer.mypurecloud.com, when you go here, you'll be asked if we can track you and know everything about you, your firstborn, whatever now. Just basic tracking. We use our AutoCloud product here for basic journey tracking on the website. But this is the Developer Center, scaled up so things are a little squished here so you can see it. We have links down at the bottom. The Ideas Lab is down here, so if you have any great ideas, want to make product enhancement requests, you can go there. Over on the right-hand side, there's a general breakdown of the site. So if you're new users, you can go to the Getting Started section. The big thing is the API documentation. And go to Platform API, if that's one you want to look at, and API resources. This has all of the different API resources here for the different categories. So we can go, let's look at some architect APIs. If you need to make any API requests, this is your first stop to see what APIs there are and what you can do with them. It'll document the different parameters, any required permissions that the user or client credentials has to have, and required scopes. So scopes are still not quite out yet, but we're already documenting them so you can prepare. If the API requires any specific scopes, it'll say so right here. So the parameters tells you where they are: query string, body, path parameters, and then we document, give you an example of the request and curl, so you can just copy and paste it, slap in your auth token, and make requests in your terminal if that's your thing. And then the responses are documented as well. So it gives you the schema documentation that actually describes each property. Not all of them have descriptions because some of them are fairly obvious. Others do, and if there's valid values, those will be described as well. If you'd like to see it as JSON, there you go, there's a JSON object. I mentioned before about error codes. And here you can see there's a 206 response code. So this API will not only return a 200, but may return a 206 in some cases. For the error codes, they are documented here. So you can see the specific errors that you might get if you want to have specific handling in your application for those errors. Then you can put that in there, and this will help you, if you're collecting user input, you can use these to help guide your user and say, oh, it was a known error condition that was found, so I'm going to display a message that says, if I got this error message, then you can tell your user, hey, you need to put a name in the field, so you know you can give them helpful messages instead of just saying something went wrong. Right, and also the search. So you can navigate there directly or type in API resources. Spell. There we go. So we do have a search feature on there. Check that out. All right, back to the presentation. So the developer, yes, go ahead.
You've got version 2 in a lot of those endpoints.
Yes.
Is that version number likely to change often, or is it historic?
It may change, but not often. So we had a V1 for several years, and then now we have V2. We've had that for maybe 3 to 4 years now. And as far as I know, there's no current plans for a V3. So those major versions, that's linked to the back-end API service, and so until we decide to tear that down and completely rewrite a new API service, it'll be V2. So you're not going to see, just incremental versions on those APIs. And we do have a change management page that discusses what kind of changes that we do make. We make every effort not to make breaking changes, but if we do have to make a breaking change, we still won't implement that V2, but we will announce it 60 days in advance.
Should we plan on keeping that a configurable item in code, or?
No. Whenever V3 comes out, you're going to have to probably do some significant rewriting to use the new API, so simply just using a variable wouldn't get you very far in that case.
Thank you.
All right, so the developer tools, API Explorer. So if you want to test out some APIs but don't feel like writing a whole application and setting everything up to handle all that, the API Explorer is a great tool to use for that. And honestly, we wrote it for ourselves to use because we didn't want to write applications just to test an API either. So we wrote an application to test the APIs. So I've just got it bookmarked, but there's links all over the place for developer tools. There's a couple other things in here. I won't walk through all of them, but the code editor, if you want to try a little JavaScript, so you want to do just a little bit of scripting to test some stuff out, like chain APIs together, do a get some IDs, and then use that in another request, you can do that in the code editor. And there's some examples in there you can, excuse me, there's some examples you can load as well. We have a notification tester, so you can subscribe to notification topics and see the output of the notification when you're doing stuff like changing your presence or handling conversations. Again, no code to be able to see that. Web chats, if you want to be able to start a guest web chat and get that ACD routed in your org, you can just go to the web chats page. Screen share, you can test that as well. Create callbacks. A big one here is the analytics query builder. So if you're doing any analytics stuff and you don't want to write big JSON objects by hand, the analytics query builder gives you a UI tool to pick and choose what you want and build those filters, and then it'll spit out the JSON you need that you can use in your app. We have the same basic thing for search queries, and Application Inspector will help you see some usage about your application. But looking at the API Explorer, so whenever you first go to this website, if you're already signed into your PureCloud org, it'll automatically log you in. So when I went to this site, you didn't see a login screen because I'm already logged in. But it does show my profile picture over here, and then when you click on it, it gives you your user's me information, so you can get your ID and division and anything else on here, so you can grab your own user information, which is really useful when making some API requests. Here in the API Explorer, so if I wanted to get the user's me, I can just type in user's me and it will filter. And there's the user's me. There we go, and I hit send request. And there's the response. So it tells me it was a 200 response code. It gives me all the headers here so I can see what the correlation ID was. So if you're testing something out and you need to open up a support ticket or post something on the forum, you can grab the correlation ID right there. And then you can see the actual response body. So whatever the JSON payload is will be down here. And it does have little collapsers in it, so you can collapse some of the parts that you don't want to see and just go through and see what the response to the API is. So you can do this for any API. It supports all the different methods, get, put, patch, post, delete, and test out any API using this tool. So super useful when you're developing apps and you don't want to run the whole thing, just make some quick API calls. You can also use this if you are running IT for your organization and need to run some analytics queries. This is a great tool to just ad hoc run some queries. Or make some API requests to do something. You can use this tool, in production. We use it for stuff as well. And finally, you can share this. There we go. So the share request button, click that, and so you can get a link, and it has a bunch of stuff there in the end. That says what's in the request. So if you put a request body in something and want to share it, it won't keep your response in there, but you can share the exact request you made with anybody else. Send it to somebody in your org, send it to support, whoever you need to send it to. You can also get it as curl. So right here, just you can copy that and paste it into your terminal and run it with your auth token in there. And if you check that checkbox, I'm not going to because this session's recorded and I don't want my auth token in the recording. But it'll populate that insert auth token with your actual auth token so that you don't have to go grab it from somewhere else. So a great way to test this. And again, it'll fill it out with everything you filled in for your request for more complex request things. All right, any questions so far? All right. So common problems, start at the beginning, authorization errors. So if you're going to be making any API requests, the first thing you have to do is authorize. Troubleshooting authorization problems can be a little tricky because the responses are intentionally vague. When you try and authenticate, we don't give you a response back that says, hey, sorry, the password for that account was off by 1 character, please try again. That's not really very secure. Sometimes we can tell you, we'll give you as much as we can securely, but really check for typos. That's the first step because the auth process does work. Our own apps use it, so the process itself shouldn't be broken. We've had very few bugs in the process, so if you think you found a bug, absolutely report it, but I'll just start off saying it's unlikely that you did. So after you check for typos, make sure that your redirect URIs match character for character. So if you just say mysite.com is your redirect URI in your configuration, and then in your app, you say my redirect URI is mysite.com/, that's a different redirect URI. It has to match exactly. That's one that bites somebody. If you've got that right, go back to typos. Did you mistype something? And review the Dev Center documentation. Maybe you just didn't format your request correctly. Check it out. You can just search for auth, and you can find the different auth grant types, and look through those, make sure, and then again, check for typos, because probably one of those things. At the end, if you're still stuck, definitely head on over to the developer forum and make a post, and we'll see what we can do to help guide you through it. Sometimes it's just easier to get a second set of eyes and spot that typo really quick. All right, so common problems, bad requests. We talked about the 400 level status codes a little bit. 400, problem with the request itself. 401, you forgot to send that auth header. 403, you're probably lacking permissions. And 404, you got a typo somewhere. Some of the areas that you might see if you send the wrong data type. So it'll say value, whatever value you put is not valid for the property object, and it'll tell you what the type is. Some of those messages say the specific field, some don't, but that can help you figure out that it wanted a string, or it wanted, in this case, an integer, and you sent a string. So that's not okay. So you'll get that 400 error back with that. Validation error, so if you're just simply missing a field that's required, it'll tell you that. And maybe some invalid enum errors. So certain things allow only certain values, which is the enum list of values, and if you put something invalid in there, it'll tell you that it didn't match it. And generally it will it'll tell you what the valid values are for that property. And then a general malformed request. So if you get that message that says the request could not be understood by the server due to malformed syntax, that one means you made a typo, you left off a curly brace or a comma or have an extra bracket or something that the server just tried to parse your request and it just couldn't figure out what was wrong with it, because it's a computer, not a human, and if your JSON is not well formed, you're going to get that exception. All right, so rate limiting. This comes up fairly often, not so often for user apps. Usually user apps are, have low enough throughput because they're user driven. You don't have somebody doing more than 300 actions a minute. But regardless of what your app is, if you get rate limited, you're going to get a 429 response code. There is full documentation on the Dev Center on this. It's worth a read. Any well-formed application should be able to handle a 429 response code. And kind of shut itself down so it doesn't keep making bad requests. Like I mentioned, the main API limiter is 300 requests a limit. Wow, 300 requests per minute is the limit, but that is subject to change at any time based on what we need to do for platform health. So use that retry after header. So it doesn't matter how many requests you've made, you get a 429 response, look for the retry after header, and tell your app to sleep for that long. All right, so another common problem, get this one all the time, is you may get an error message back with the type not a user. So whenever you log in, if you log in using client credentials, there is no user context. That means a user is not logging into the application. You're only using the client credentials to log into the app. It's not in the context of any particular person. When you create that client credentials OAuth grant, you have to specify a role, and that role grants permissions to the OAuth client so that you can use certain APIs. However, some of them cannot be used. For example, if you want to manipulate conversations, like answer conversations or transfer them or disconnect them and you have a backend service that you want to just automatically do all that stuff, it's it's not really going to work out because of that back-end service, since it's not running on a user's desktop or web browser. It has to use client credentials, and therefore it can't do stuff that requires a user. Most of the APIs can be used with client credentials, just not all of them. Unfortunately, there's not an indicator on the APIs which ones can and can't be used. Some of them do note in the description that it requires a user context, so if you see that, that means no client credentials. But the best way to find out, just test it. So make that request, and if you get back not a user, that means you can't use it. Certain ones, like patching a conversation participant, it depends on what you're doing. That request can be used with client credentials to, for example, set participant attributes on the participant. However, you can't change the state of that participant with client credentials. So same API, but under certain circumstances, you'll get that not a user there. All right, so context and correlation IDs. It's the same thing. We just named it different things in different places because, thought it would be fun to confuse everybody. So if you see anybody say context ID, but then your response says correlation ID, it's the same thing. You're not wrong there. So there's two places you can find it. Every request, whether it's successful or not, the response will have the ININ correlation ID. For those of you that are new to the Genesis world, Genesis bought Interactive Intelligence several years ago, and at that point we had already started, we were using our Interactive Intelligence name and stuff. So it still says ININ because we didn't want to break everybody's apps, or just a pedantic name change. You'll also find it in the error body as context ID. So that will tell you in the actual body what it is, and it's the same value as in the header, just in two places. All right, so getting help. If you think of any questions, as I'm sure you will, right after you walk out of the room, like, man, I wish I would have asked that. Check out one of the forums. If you have a question about the base product, general, how does this feature work, or how do I configure something in the admin UI, how do I set this up? Those are generally questions for the community forum. There are technical people there that answer questions, but the community forum is not for development-specific questions. It's for just base product configuration. If you do have API-specific questions or something about a customization you're writing that's more than just configuration, that's a good case for the developer forum. So you can ask anything there. I answer the questions on there for the most part. So you get to come ask me. There are some other employees that hang out there, and a lot of the answers I get are from other people that I go work with each dev team to figure out the answer to the question and then get it posted out there. And sometimes neither of those is appropriate, and you'll need to open a case with PureCloud Care. Excuse me. So you'll need to contact Care if you find a bug and you're sure something's just not behaving correctly. You'll need to go to Care, or if it has to do with your customer-specific data. So if there's some value that's incorrect in your data that, hey, it says this, but I know that's wrong. That's not something we can investigate through the forum. We try to keep all PII off the forum, and so anything that's specific to your org data, we can't discuss in that publicly open forum. These forums are visible publicly on the internet. You don't even have to log in. For the developer forum, you can log in with your PureCloud account or create one through email, so you don't even have to be a current customer. But just keep in mind that if you are discussing some data-specific thing, Care is probably the place to go for that. All right, so if none of those options are the right answer for you, take this opportunity to plug Genesis Professional Services. The forum does have a limited scope. I can try and help you work through your design, work through any issues you're having, but at some point, if you're coming to the forum and saying, hey, I want to build a custom agent application, can you tell me what I need to do? you're going to get some links to the authorization docs and API docs that say have fun. I'm not going to design your solution for you. If you need to work with somebody to help you architect that, that's a great case for professional services. They offer a couple different packages. You can see here the quick start, proof of concept, or advanced development. So they'll do anything from basic consulting if you just need to have some one-on-one FaceTime with somebody to sit down and have them walk you through something. They do that all the way through. You can give them the requirement of, hey, build me a custom agent app, and they'll work through that with you, figure out what all your requirements are, and build the whole thing for you. So it's a great thing. I used to be in PS for I think about 6 years, so I can testify that it's awesome. Not as awesome anymore since I left, but still pretty good. And that is my last slide. So, any questions?
So you're saying scope is not available yet?
The scopes are not available yet, correct. There are some customers that are in a beta for that, but we went ahead and got the docs out there just so that anybody can see those and know what's coming.
Thank you.
And specific to that, any configuration that you have already made won't have scopes applied to it. It'll be grandfathered in. But starting, I think, either sometime recently or coming up soon, any new configuration will be affected by the scopes requirement. All right, we're going to do a drawing for the Yeti. Did everybody get their tickets?
Hey, Tim, I have a question.
Yes.
If I have to ask a question on the developer forum, what should I always include in my request? What should I never, ever put in my forum?
Well, you should always include some sort of offer to send me some PayPal money. I accept Venmo too. No, that's wildly inappropriate. No, so always include a correlation ID if you're having a problem with a specific request. That'll help speed things up, because if you have that correlation ID in your initial post, I can grab that and go check that in the logs. That's not something that customers have access to, the logs, because all of the, as a cloud service, all the logs are dumped together. So unfortunately, if we gave you access to view your logs, you'd have access to everyone else's logs, and I think we can all agree that that would not be a good thing. So include that correlation ID in your post. What you should not include is your authorization token. Remember that one time where I said I'm not going to click that checkbox because I don't want to show you my auth token? Your auth token is effectively your password, because if you post your auth token on the forum, that's a public website, and anybody on the internet or other people can go, hey, I'm going to use that, and then start making API requests with your auth token, and can do stuff like change your password, create new users, set up international dialing, commit toll fraud. So don't post your auth token, please. If I catch anybody doing it, I'll strip it out of there and let you know that, hey, you posted that. Make sure you do a little review on your org, make sure nobody got that. I do have notifications when people post, so I do try to at least skim them to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate in the post as soon as it comes in, even if I don't address it right away. So try to minimize that security risk, but it does happen from time to time when people, post their log snip and it dumps out their auth header. So just be careful with that. And definitely any customer data, don't be posting customers' email addresses and phone numbers, whatever. It is a public site, so there's nothing stopping anyone malicious from scraping it for email addresses and phone numbers and any other data, addresses, anything like that. So when you post on the forum, you're posting publicly on the internet, so don't say anything there that you wouldn't say to your mother.